Hi, this is Lili Anderson, and you're listening to Teasing Glory. Thank you for joining me. This week we're talking about sections 89 to 92 in the church curriculum of Scripture study, and again, I'm going to treat these with a really light touch. So if you want a little more content, you can always look back 4 years to the audio podcasts that I started in the middle of the DNC year. But we'll touch on this a little bit and see where we can go. I'm going to start with a couple of current events. Anyway, they just make you shake your head. Things are going on in our crazy world, but I do see all of this as a precursor to Christ's coming. I just don't think we knew how bizarre it would look, but it's bizarre what we're seeing, and it can be frightening, but I am loving the phrase that Elder Rasband used when he was speaking about President Nelson's joyful optimism when he looked forward to the second coming or spoke of the coming of the Lord in glory. I think that's our ticket right there, brothers and sisters. We need to be joyfully optimistic and try to temper the desperation that some of us feel. Because it's easy to start to feel desperate or anxious, but it's not useful. It's not useful. We need to keep living in this sphere, live the life that we are given, as unwelcome as parts of it may be, or as difficult as it can seem to be in our trials and in our challenges and what's happening in our relationships and our families. Nobody is exempt these days from the onslaughts of Satan and the troubles in the world, but we are here to rise above through Christ. We're here to have a broader vision that God gives us again and again and again in almost every page of Scripture, and certainly in the temple, and certainly in the whisperings of the Spirit, that we are not creatures only of this earth. This is a sphere of our existence, and it's an important one, but it's not the only one. And we are meant for eternity, whatever level of glory we choose in eternity. That's where our lives will be lived. This is preparatory time. This is a testing time. Can we handle the flesh? Can we handle the troubles? Can we handle the concerns without losing our faith? Can we not be oblivious to what's going on, but can we, again, rise above it with a long view, with delayed gratification at its zenith, and realize that that's what God invites again and again, is to look beyond what is happening right now to what our choices today will mean in the future. So it's not about losing our grounding to this moment, because we are living in this moment and we are making choices that will have a big effect. We are literally choosing the glory that we will inhabit in the sphere to come, in the life to come. So choose wisely. You may get the Indiana Jones reference there. Okay, but here's one of the crazy things going on. Roblox, which I'd never heard of before, but it's a user-generated online game platform and creation system. So people can go on there, and it's free. Of course, they always start out free, and then you can buy currency of the website, and so it's a multi-billion-dollar business now. But it's another online platform for gamers and so on, and they can create and share and, experience that, community and whatever. So there's a young man who is a Roblox participant. His name is Michael. I don't have more information than that, but he went online with a video. Oh my gosh. Seriously, cannot make this stuff up. I mean, it's tragic, but yeah, laugh or cry. I would prefer to chuckle in, just maybe a little bit of cynicism, which is helping me get through. He is a young man who, on Roblox, developed a system where he could identify child predators. And he talks about some of the different things that are available on this website, Roblox, that are not appropriate content at all for children, and where adults can talk to children anonymously, and anyway, all this kind of stuff that's going on. He kind of goes into even some of the examples in his video. But because he kind of got into this, he exposed and reported 6 specific child predators that were using that website to contact children for nefarious, pedophile type reasons. And the billion-dollar company's response, again, this is the stuff you can't make up, was to threaten him with a written cease and desist order and then totally ban him from the platform. So here's this kid, and he's young, like not 18 yet. You look at him and he looks like, a young teenager. And he was like, hey, there's child predatory behavior here, and I'm going to report it. And he found 6 specific predators that he reported, and the company tells him to cease and desist and then bans him from the platform. Did they do anything against the child predators or the access that child predators have to children on Roblox? No, apparently not. Not that he knew of. So he was sort of dumbfounded and sharing this on, I think it was an X post. But anyway, talk about calling good evil and evil good. Like, let's not protect our youth. Let's not protect our young. Let's stop anybody from exposing the evil and the corruption or the avenues by which pedophiles are accessing children. Be careful about your online usage for your kids and for ourselves as well, of course, but especially with children. I've mentioned this before, and I don't remember his name right now, but there's a guy who goes around lecturing about social media all over the country, and he has reported in interviews that he says, I've talked to a lot of parents, and after the presentations, and I get questions at the end of the presentation, but then afterwards people come to talk individually. And he said, I have never, ever heard a parent say, I wish I had given my children more access to the internet or more access to social media. It's all the reverse. Everybody who talks to him is telling him the opposite. And he's talked to hundreds and hundreds and maybe received messages from thousands of parents saying, I wish I had been more diligent. It is not easy. You are swimming upstream to do that. But brothers and sisters, this is a huge investment in the safety of our children. So learn what you need to learn. And there is information out there on how certain tools can be used. And then, of course, what about just monitoring? What about just not letting our kids have screens in their bedrooms? Like, I still don't understand why anybody lets their children have screens in their bedrooms. I don't understand that. It seems like a really simple threshold to just, like, we're just going to not cross this one. Screens are going to have to be in the public areas of the family. And then they're checked in at night. There are steps that can be taken. Don't just throw up your hands and say it's too late. Like, you're still a steward over your children. There's a lot of information online about how to do that and the dangers of it, and even just screen time in and of itself. I remember reading an article probably 5 or 6 years ago now that even included images, MRI images of the brain, and showed how too much screen time inhibits the final development of the prefrontal cortex, which is up in here, that helps us make logical decisions and reason things through, have critical thinking, et cetera, make good decisions. And too much screen time in youth is prohibiting that development or that final development, which, by the way, doesn't completely develop until the early to mid-20s. Young men, it's like the mid-20s. Young women, it's typically the early 20s. Anyway, beware and don't give up. Don't throw up your hands and say there's nothing we can do about it now. It might take some serious effort. Kids don't like to retreat from excess. Big surprise there. So what? So what? They're kids. Somebody's got to be the adult in the room. It's your turn to be the adult. It's your turn. And God will help us. He will help us if we pray for guidance and help. That doesn't mean it's going to not be an effort or a learning curve, but please consider those things. Anyway, another comment that you don't even know what to make of it exactly, but maybe you know the name George Will. I remember years ago reading his editorial comments in Newsweek magazine, long time ago. When Chris was in graduate school, for some reason, we had a Newsweek subscription for a while, and that was where I got the news, and I didn't read everything every week, but I usually read his column. And he identifies as a conservative/libertarian, has been in the journalism business forever. He's in his 80s now. And he really doesn't like Trump, so he's kind of anti the current administration and has been anti-Trump from the beginning. So he has opinions that I don't always agree with, for sure, but this was an interesting one. He was being interviewed by Bill Maher on Bill Maher's show, and Maher talks about this Zoran Mamdani, who is the socialist candidate for mayor, who already won the Democratic primary and is looking like he's going to sweep into the mayor's spot when the election comes. Maher is asking George Will what he thinks about that, and this is George Will's answer. I actually looked it up so that I could get the words right. He said, "I think every 20 years or so, we need a conspicuous, confined experiment with socialism so we can crack it up again." Like, come again? I guess he's willing to sacrifice New York City, which is the financial hub of the world. But he's like, maybe this just has to happen every 20 years, is that we give socialism a crack at things and show how flawed it is, how destructive, how damaging. Now, the risk and the cost could be significant given the centrality of New York City when it comes to financial happenings, Wall Street and all of that. But it could happen anyway. He goes on and says, the socialist slogan used to be, "Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains." The new socialist slogan, and this is pretty good. He goes, the new socialist slogan is, "Trust us. This time it won't be a mess." So, when the post-war Labour government in Britain, well, he's talking about post-World War II, Labour government in the UK, was about to get started, one of their leading lights was a socialist named Aneurin Bevan. I was not familiar with that name, but apparently he was one of their leading lights in the post-war Labour government in Britain. He said himself, what could go wrong? He said, "We have a nation bedded on coal, surrounded by fish. It would take an organizational genius to have a shortage of either." In 3 years, the UK had a shortage of both coal and fish. And George Will concludes that's socialism. Well, it is. Socialism is bad fantasy thinking and inspired by Satan. Let's not just, put this in a too secular of a mode. Yeah, it's a bad idea. It's a lot of bad ideas, but it's inspired by Satan himself. It is a counterfeit of the United Order, and it has that very nefarious and manipulative appeal that, like, oh, we're going to make sure everybody has everything they need, and don't worry about it. The government will take care of you. What was that Reagan thing? I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And what an oxymoron that is. Anyway, socialism is a mess and it creates shortages and disaster and death and really ramps up the evil. I don't know if I love the idea of giving them a crack at New York City, but I don't know if we have a choice at this point. There's another socialist, avowed socialist, who's running for mayor in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I don't think he's won the primary yet or anything, but anyway, he's very open about it, and it maybe not as extreme in some of the statements that he's made, but like, what are we doing? Like, how did we, again, as Jordan Peterson asks, how did we manage to get out of the 20th century without learning the lesson that socialism was at least as, if not much more destructive than fascism? What happened there? How did that blind spot persist and continue to persist today, particularly in our youth, who seem to have no understanding of this? Really worth kitchen table conversations about this. Okay. These sections are pretty familiar. I mean, some of them are quite short. Of course, we have the word of wisdom in section 89, but I'm going to go backwards and then forwards. Anyway, I'm going to jump around a little bit. How about that? Section 92 is very brief. We're talking about a direct revelation to Frederick G. Williams, who just prior to this section, and these sections are happening in the end of February and the beginning of March of 1833. So the church is just a few weeks away from being 3 years old as a formal organization. So, the organization continues to develop and the understanding and the revelations are coming and, more and more is being clarified. At any rate, the United Firm, which is mentioned in section 92, is the business arm of the law of consecration that's happening in the Missouri settlement of the saints in the Independence area. And Frederick G. Williams replaces somebody as the counselor in the first presidency. We talked about that a few sections ago, how somebody was set apart and left the church very quickly after. So Frederick G. Williams is inserted even in that previous revelation as a member of the first presidency, and this comes to him as a direction to be involved and receive the united firm, and for the united firm to receive him. Now, I do like this phrase. I'm just going to mention here. Where is this? Oh, yeah, in verse 2. It's only 2 verses long, but in the middle of verse 2, the instruction to Frederick G. Williams is that you shall be a lively member in this order. A lively member. Anyway, that caught my attention this time, and I thought, are we lively members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Are we lively members? What does that mean, to be a lively member? I think there's value in that phrase, and I think it's a great idea to look at that and consider, am I a lively member? What does my membership look like? How does it present? How does it manifest? How does my Christianity manifest in my membership, or my testimony of Christ, or my desire to receive the light, my journey towards sanctification, my effort to become Zion ready, my effort to choose glory, the celestial glory? How does that manifest? Is it lively? Does it manifest in a lively way? I hope so. I think it's a great thing to contemplate for a minute. Of course, in section 91, another brief section that just tells Joseph Smith he doesn't need to translate the Apocrypha. Although it does say that there are some things that are true and some things that are not true in the Apocrypha, which, as you may know, was included in some Bibles, not the King James Version, but there were some publications of the Bible that included the Apocrypha as kind of a section between the Testaments. And so some people cited it like Scripture and others did not. The King James translation and version was what the prophet Joseph was looking at when he was retranslating. The Apocrypha was not included as regular parts of the Bible, but he inquired about it and gets this answer. But there's a nice point in verse 5, which is not surprising. Whoso is enlightened by the Spirit shall obtain benefit therefrom. So as with all learning, if we are inspired by the Spirit, we can be benefited from learning. But the Spirit becomes a filter, and please don't ever forget that. I've said this so many times. When I went through graduate school, especially the master's portion, which was the therapy degree, the master's of social work, the Scriptures and the Spirit were my urim and thummim. Because even then, now it was when my kids were all in school, but that's a long time ago now, even then, those therapy professions were going weird, and they were being, so current about views on sexuality, particularly. So in all these areas of sexuality, human behavior in terms of their sexual nature, and, that included marriage or homosexuality or pornography or masturbation, all those subjects, my program was very woke even back then. And I knew, because I know what God has said about those things, that that's not true. I don't care what the research says. The research is easily manipulated or flawed or mistaken, and I'm not falling for it. So I hope we always, whatever we're consuming, are relying on the Spirit of the Lord. How many times have we talked about this, and we'll mention it again, that we can't spiritually survive in the last days, as our prophets have said, or honestly in any age, without the Spirit, because there always is the effort of Satan to counterfeit the truth, or to deceive, or to throw in sophistry, and we are seeing that ramped up, to max levels, it seems like right now, in these very last of the last days. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. Oh yeah, I wanted to give a little background to these sections that I think are kind of interesting. So this is from an Institute manual on the Doctrine and Covenants. In the 1830s, the use of tobacco and alcohol was prevalent in the U.S. And when I grew up in Indiana, all my friends' parents smoked. All of them smoked. It was normal. And people would comment, like I had friends in my home sometimes after school, and they would comment, oh, don't your parents smoke? And, don't they drink coffee? Because there wasn't, coffee stuff on the counter. So it was odd. It was odd to not have smoking even then, let alone back here in the time of Kirtland. Beginning in the late 1700s and into the early 1800s, different religious groups began a temperance movement that called for reform and abstinence from the use of alcohol. So there were movements to curb the use because of all the bad things that happen when people are drunk. And anyway, under the influence, right? A temperance society was organized locally in Kirtland, Ohio in October 1830. So that's shortly before the Saints come. And then the School of the Prophets is organized in January of 1833. So now the Saints are there, and we've established the School of the Prophets, and they began meeting regularly in an upstairs room in the Newell K. Whitney store. I know you've heard this before, and this is in Kirtland. That room was part of a living space where Joseph and Emma resided. The use of tobacco during these meetings, again, we've heard this story, brought about the circumstances that prompted the prophet Joseph to inquire of the Lord. In a sermon given in 1868, so this is much later in the Salt Lake Valley, President Brigham Young described the setting in the School of the Prophets. The brethren came to that place from hundreds of miles around to attend school in a little room, probably no larger than 11 by 14 feet. So, bedroom size, maybe a little larger than some bedrooms. When they assembled together in this room after breakfast, the first they did was to light their pipes and, while smoking, talk about the great things of the kingdom and spit all over the room. And as soon as the pipe was out of their mouths, a large chew of tobacco would then be taken. Often when the prophet entered the room to give the school instructions, he would find himself in a cloud of tobacco smoke. You kind of visualize this, right? This and, honestly, I can't even stand the smell of tobacco. I don't know when that happened, but maybe it was, I don't know. It was a long time ago because I'm very sensitive to tobacco smoke. And even like in airports, when you go out and they have a smoking area for people, if I get a whiff, I'm going to have to move. I can't stand it. But can you imagine? This is the cloud of smoke that the prophet's teaching through. And then, of course, there were the complaints of Emma of having to clean so filthy a floor. And this made the prophet think upon the matter. He inquired of the Lord. And the revelation known as the word of wisdom was the result. Zebedee Coltrane, one of the participants in the School of Prophets, reported that after the prophet read the revelation to the brethren, they, quote from his record, they immediately threw their tobacco and pipes into the fire. So a nice show of sacrifice and a willingness to make a quick effort to obey. A little bit later in the history here, or the background, it says in this manual, although church members were not required, this is kind of interesting, to live the word of wisdom immediately after it was given, some things kind of grow into understanding, as we have seen. Church leaders gradually invited the saints to more fully live the word of wisdom. During the Fall General Conference of 1851, so again, they're in Utah now, President Brigham Young proposed that all saints formally covenant to abstain from tea, coffee, tobacco, and whiskey. On October 13th of 1882, so that's, 30 years after Brigham Young proposes to make that kind of a standard, 30 years later, the Lord revealed to President John Taylor that the word of wisdom was to be considered a commandment. So at first it said, let's not screw up this floor for Emma, and let's get rid of the cloud of smoke and just the filthiness of the habit. And so this is late February 1833, and then it's not until 51 that Brigham Young says we need to consider this as a commandment and invites the saints to see it in that light. So that's not quite 20 years later. And then 30 years after that, John Taylor has the revelation from the Lord when he is the prophet that this now needs to be not just a custom of the church, but seen as a commandment. And then again, it's another gap of almost 40 years. In 1919, the first presidency under Heber J. Grant made the observance of the word of wisdom a requirement for receiving a temple recommend. That's not until 1919, and this revelation comes in 1833. So it's quite a long time later. The word of wisdom continues to be an important commandment today, and obeying it is a prerequisite for baptism, temple attendance, missionary service, and other worthy service in the church. Now, A couple of comments about this. Again, I hope you're familiar with it. I hope as you read, you are inspired again by the Spirit to know where to focus or where to ponder, where to refresh our understanding or expand our understanding. And, there's a lot of good stuff here that I'm not going to get into. I'm really not. I'm just going to touch on a couple of things. Of course, it's a principle with a promise. I do think it's interesting in verse 3 that it is adapted to the capacity of the weak and the weakest of all saints. I think, what does that mean? It sounds to me like it means like if you can't do this one, you're in trouble because this one is easy. This is low-hanging fruit, brothers and sisters. Just live the word of wisdom. Now, I think about that because over many years, I think, of course, how many things have changed when it comes to health and what we are exposed to, what we choose to expose our bodies to. Some things we have no choice, other things we do. And this is about the things that we can make a choice concerning, right? And the Lord doesn't want to command us in all things. He tells us that regularly. So when energy drinks became a thing, all the Red Bull and the whatever that names are, I don't even know the names of them other than that one. But do we need to be commanded in all things? I mean, when I realize that the church has said, okay, we're not going to make a big deal about caffeine or caffeinated sodas and so on, although soda itself is so unhealthy for us. Athletes don't drink soda because it cuts their wind. Plus, it's not good for your bones. I mean, there are lots of studies that have shown that. What is that old science fair project that kids would do where they'd put a penny in a little jar with Coca-Cola in it? And I don't know how long it took. You could probably Google it. But after a while, the penny dissolved. So who are we kidding? Is this stuff really good for us? Now, am I wanting to be super extreme? No, I'm not. Because I do think that when it comes to stuff like this, there is a place for moderation, which the Lord has also commanded. And we've talked before about being on either end of the spectrum. To be extreme tends to be problematic. And we don't need to be on the extremes. The Lord is saying, like, kind of get a grip. Like, let's think. Let's be rational. Let's be logical about this. But also let's recognize that the Lord knows things we don't know. So let's default to his counsel, to his commandments always, and be willing, like these brethren, to throw our pipes in the fire, so to speak. What do we need to throw in the fire in terms of our sacrifice? It's adapted for the weak and the weakest of saints. So can we just get a grip? And we recognize that, like, okay, I probably don't need to be commanded in a specific way to know that it's easy to overindulge on sugar. Sugar seems to be omnipresent. I mean, honestly, this does make me shake my head and roll my eyes, and I have my whole adult life pondered why on earth we always have to have, a really unhealthy treat at our church activities. With rare exception, I think I've been invited to speak at maybe one or two events where, over many years, where they didn't have some really unhealthy treat. Now, I'm not against treats. I like a treat here and there too, but can we cut back a little bit? Do we have to be commanded that, like, okay, yeah, Utah is sort of known for being dry, a dry state, meaning we don't drink as much here because the membership still has a presence. But boy, do we make it up in sugar, it seems like, right? I mean, they had the green Jello Olympic pin that they even sold because Utah's known for green Jello and for being the only place where you can find Jello with vegetables in it, which is also true. And sugar. I think Utah, I haven't looked this up recently, but I haven't looked it up before, that Utah is like the number one state for ice cream consumption per capita. And that's in all months of the year. So, not even taking a pause in the wintry months that can get pretty cold in Utah. So, yeah, have we replaced one indulgence with another? I just would invite all of us to let's be lively members about that too. Let's inquire of the Lord. Let's seek the Spirit in knowing how to take care of our bodies. Now, I'm not a perfect example. I've certainly gone through my phases, been trying to, get my health going again and energy levels back. And bless Red River Wellness for all their help with that. They're very careful about diet, and I know that that was really good for me. And I'm trying not to screw it up now that the protocol is over, because I trust that it does make a difference what we consume and what we eat and drink. So anyway, let's not be slothful servants, brothers and sisters. Let's get a grip. If this is for the weak and the weakest of the saints, can we take it up a notch? Can we maybe do better than the bare minimum of just not drinking alcohol, which, like, please, let's keep that line, and tobacco and stuff like that. But let's not just wait to be commanded in all things. I don't want to get into the meat issue. I know that when we read the China study, many of us in our family read that book, or not the book, the China study, but a book based on that same study, which was called Eat to Live by Joel Furman. And it was illuminating about how important it is to eat plant foods and whole foods. Not that that was a big surprise. And I liked that it was very consistent with the word of wisdom. I remember when the Atkins diet became very popular decades ago, feeling a little uncomfortable about that because it was so heavy on meats. And I thought, can that be right when the word of wisdom says to eat meat sparingly? Now, I do want to say that this is not about condemning our neighbor or being immoderate or being extreme, because it does say only in times of famine. And then I've heard people make a case that is not unconvincing in some respects, that we are in a famine. As abundant as food is in the United States and much of the world now that we've gone into mass production and so on, and we can ship things all over, and hunger has dropped dramatically worldwide. But then we exchange that for being overfed and undernourished, where we consume lots of calories, but they're not particularly nutritious. And we've talked about that, about how there are studies that show that you have to eat like 4.5 apples today to get the nutritional value of an apple in the 1940s and 50s. So whether we've farmed out the land or we've, mistreated our stewardships, we're seeing that. Plus, there's all that genetic modification going on with grains and other foods that have problematic outcomes. A lot of people are gluten sensitive, even though God says wheat is for man. And so, let's use wisdom. Let's use the Spirit to find out what's my path. I'm very cognizant of, and I hope you are too, other places where God says, I think through Paul the Apostle in one place, and in the DNC, that don't tell people to abstain from meat. I mean, that's going too far. So again, moderation. Let's try to seek the Spirit in this world where there are so many things that affect our food supply and our water supply, for that matter, and just the chemicals that are around us that are off-gassing from our furniture and our carpet and our drain, whatever. Let's seek guidance of the Spirit. And let's be patient about that, studying it out in our minds to find out what our path is. I was speaking to a friend about this a couple of months back, and she mentioned that for a long time she struggled with a health issue and was very prayerful about it and did a lot of searching and study and prayer, and eventually found a change in her diet that completely cleared up this kidney problem that had given her a lot of health repercussions. And she had tried all kinds of things first. So patience can be required as well. The Lord gives us line upon line and precept upon precept, and He wants us to do our due diligence. Can I just take a moment and throw this out there for thought? I'm sure I'll talk about it more later, but I've been really pondering on this myself, that in some ways I think we look toward the millennium as the finish line. It's not the finish line, brothers and sisters. It is a great threshold to enter a period of time where Christ will reign personally on the earth and the wicked will be cleansed from off the earth, not trying to diminish how magnificent and wonderful it would be to be on the earth at that time, to raise your children, as it says, without sin unto salvation, to be able to be in the presence of the Lord. I mean, it's a magnificent time, but it doesn't mean the end to work. Like, God wants us to work. It's good for us to work. We grow when we invest in effort. The Lord loves effort, as President Nelson has said. So I hope we don't think it will be the end of work. We're not going to be all on our, lounge somewhere, waiting for the barge to come in with all the things we need. There will be work to do. I think there's going to be a ton of missionary work to do. Of course, there'll be a lot of family history work and temple work to do. I think there's going to be the work of healing, and I don't think God ever waves a magic wand. I mean, clearly he doesn't. He can do miracles, but he doesn't want to rob us of the process of thought and pondering and studying and praying and receiving. So let's just keep it going now. Let's not think that if I pray, all the answers are just going to come in a memo. I mean, I do need to invest because the Lord wants me to grow from those efforts. He wants me to grow from the process of thinking and learning and studying and, studying it out in our mind. Remember the message to Oliver Cowdery, you thought you could just ask? No, that's not how this works. You need to do your due diligence. And yes, I will inspire that process if you include me in it. Okay, just my thought about the millennium. It's been on my mind lately. I don't think it can be the end to opposition because opposition does allow us to grow. And as Lehigh so succinctly put it, there must needs be opposition in all things. So that's okay. That's okay. We can still look forward joyfully to that change of experience on the planet. But let's not think that the work ends. God just adds glory to the work. What he does is his work and his glory. So there will always be work. Okay, I'm going to mention, though, something about the conspiracies because I can't help myself. And, of course, this is a rabbit hole that we can go crazy with. Anyway, then I should mention that, of course, it's not just a temporal commandment, it's a spiritual commandment. And the Lord gives this powerful blessing that is a spiritual blessing. And we may not have all the physical blessings that we want in this life because the Lord tries his people. And that's not a condemnation of our willingness to live or execution of living the word of wisdom. We still can have health problems. That's part of being on this planet. And hopefully we never judge our neighbor about that either, but let's recognize that the real blessings are spiritual. And that will never be taken from us if we make our efforts to comply. Okay, and then, I do think, sometimes people make a big deal about, giving up something, and you're kind of like, if this is the price of the entry into the kingdom of God, how fast can I pay? Just where's the counter? Where do I put my money on the counter? Because if giving up this, whatever substance is, the price of the kingdom I'm in, what is the kingdom of God worth to us, and what do we sacrifice for it? Okay, let's talk a little bit about the conspiracies because that was so prophetic. Can you imagine how prophetic this is? Again, Joseph Smith gets pure revelation. Verse 4, in consequence of evils and designs which do and will exist in the hearts of conspiring men in the last days, I have warned you and forewarned you. All right, Paul talked about conspiracies too, and we know that they exist. Now we can go crazy, and I'm not advocating that because, although it has been said that today's conspiracy theory seems to be tomorrow's headline. And sometimes that seems to happen too. But let's not get lost in conspiracies. We have enough to study in the gospel of Jesus Christ. But he does tell us to beware of that. Now, if anybody doesn't realize that there were conspiring men in the tobacco industries, we've been, living under a rock somewhere. Of course, there were conspiracies going on there, and they finally got revealed. But that was not the end. That in some ways was just the warm-up show. It has gotten so crazy when it comes to food, and I hope that you know some of this. There was a book that a lot of our family, not all of us, but a lot of our family read. We passed titles around. It was published in 2013, and I think we read it fairly soon after the publication date. I don't remember exactly, but it was fairly soon. So it's been at least 10 years since our family or any of us read this book called Salt, Sugar, Fat. I don't know. I think they might have updated it because I think I saw somewhere that it's in 20 languages now. So it's going around the world. It was written by Michael Moss, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. And he talked about basically the food industry's conspiracies. And this is, like I said, 10 years ago before we knew all kinds of stuff that we know now. But he talked about those perfect formulas that food scientists are paid big bucks in the industry to create that make people have cravings and hook them on different kinds of foods that are not good for them. I think he gives a big section of the book. It's been a long time. I haven't read it recently, but I did read the whole thing back then. And I'm pretty sure he has a big section on high fructose corn syrup, which was seen as this like, oh, isn't this wonderful? We've invented this way to sweeten things without sugar. Seriously? And how high fructose corn syrup, and of course there have been other documentaries and other treatments on that subject about how bad that is for us. And yes, how addictive. He tells a really cool story that I've never forgotten that I really liked about a man named Jeffrey Dunn, whose father was a Coca-Cola executive back in the time of the Cola Wars. So Jeffrey Dunn grew up in a family where the Cola Wars were going on. That was the big rivalry between Pepsi and Coke. And he was a total loyalist to Coca-Cola because his dad, worked there up in the upper administration. And he said that because of anti-nepotism policies that Coke had, it didn't seem like he would be able to work, but that was sort of his dream job, was to work for Coke like his dad had. And yet, because he did, work for other companies first, and he really pushed, his resume building and all that kind of stuff, that eventually he got his dream job of working for Coke. And so he was pretty happy with being an exec like his dad had been in that company. But then, if I remember right, and forgive me if I get the details wrong, but I think he was married to a woman who was pretty health conscious. So he started to hear more things about healthy food and so on. And I think he was responsible for introducing Dasani as a Coke product, which is bottled water, because he thought we should have something that is a healthy offering when people just need a drink. And we could market this. And anyway, it's been a big seller for Coke, right? What ended his career at Coca-Cola was that he went to scout out increasing their market in Brazil. My sisters and I traveled with my parents to South America one summer when I was just like 12 years old. And they had a Fulbright lecture scholarship in Montevideo, Uruguay. So they taught there for the summer, and we stayed in Montevideo for most of the summer. But on the way down, we hit some of the capitals in the kind of the west coast of South America, and then we went up through Brazil on our way home and spent some time in Rio, which back then was, it's still a geographically stunning city. I'll never forget how beautiful that place is. Just how beautiful that water and the mountains and the Christus statue. Anyway, stunning place. I think it's gotten to be pretty raunchy, and I understand, don't go anywhere close to there during Mardi Gras. But anyway, which is called something different in Brazil. I'm forgetting now the name, but whatever it is, it's dangerous. But what a beautiful place. And then we spent some time in Sao Paulo, which was the capital. But it was a brand new city, and they were making it like an airplane. And we saw the map and how these buildings are the wings, and here's the cockpit with the government buildings and whatever. Anyway, that was the design. But my parents pointed out, again, ever the sociologists, and we drove around to see them. They said, look at this. Before this city is even finished, because it was really in this new construction era back then and not completed as a design yet, but there were already these satellite cities that were just poverty. That's what they were. They were just the poor, favelas. And anyway, it was really just the poor had come, and they weren't going to be able to afford to live in the city, but they were right on the outskirts, and they were all around. And we drove through and around them a little bit so that our parents could show us what was happening. And so many people were there. Anyway, Jeffrey Dunn, years later, went down because they wanted to expand the Coca-Cola market by creating a product that was smaller. I believe it was a 6-ounce Coke. And they thought, these people don't have a lot of money in Brazil, but if we make a smaller container of Coke and try to sell that, they might be able to afford it, and we might open up a lot more custom there. So he went down and visited in Brazil and went around those areas and came back and concluded, he said, these people need a lot of things, but one thing they don't need is Coke. And it kind of was a come to Jesus moment for him. He ended up quitting his job, his dream job at Coke. And he went to work for Bolt House Farms, which is you know, vegetables and stuff. And in fact, I think he was involved in the production. He may have even spearheaded the production of these snack size packets of mini carrots, baby carrots for kids, like for their lunches or after school. And he's really been on a campaign since then to try to, and he goes around and speaks about it and stuff, that he's trying to make, it fun to eat fruits and vegetables, especially for kids, because it really finally hit him that, like, what are we doing? We're just trying to grind the faces of the poor by giving them stuff that's really no good for them and charging them money when what they need is like something so much better and healthier anyway. Now we've got RFK out there looking at stuff. You know this, right? You know that the US food guidelines, quote unquote, food guidelines, are not apolitical. There are so many lobbyists in and around our government that have made an impact on what the supposed healthy recommendations are for the populace, and they're not healthy. In fact, even the Heart Association deals with lobbyists to the point where a lot of, informed doctors say that if you eat like the Heart Association guidelines tell you to eat, you're going to die of heart disease because it's not healthy. So don't be naive. We can go too extreme and become conspiracy nuts and, spend all our time worrying about things we can't control. And that's not a good thing. But let's not be naive. Let's not think that when something is marketed as healthy, that it's necessarily healthy. I mean, I really got so irritated when I noticed that gummy bears, added to their packaging, no fat. It's no fat treat. I'm like, no, no, but it's just like mainlining sugar. Now, don't get me wrong. I think gummy bears are a fun snack. I don't eat them most of the time. Maybe when we went to a movie, occasionally I'd snack on some gummy bears with my popcorn, but it's no fat. And people read that stuff and they think like, oh, it's a healthy snack. Like, really? Did that work on anybody? Maybe so, because they keep doing stuff like that. And of course, in that Salt, Sugar, Fat book and lots of other sources, it tells us that that's what happened when, some of these food crazes or recommendations that have had their season have all been wrong. Like margarine is better than butter. And then it turns out like, oh no, scratch that. Of course, you never get an apology, but it was like, no, scratch that. That wasn't a good idea. Or that fats were the problem. So what did? They took the fats out of the food, but they wanted them to taste good and create that insatiable craving, so they replace it with sugar. And sometimes it was even ramped up high fructose corn syrup. So, yeah, healthy, no fat stuff or low fat stuff was just loaded up with sugar to make the taste come out right. And so beware, just be an informed consumer. We have heard, some of the recent scandals here that the food stamp program in the United States that helps people who don't have means to go and buy food from the grocery store allows for the consumption of sugared cereals and soda. And it's kind of like, is this how we want to help our people who are struggling in poverty? By giving them junk food and giving their kids junk food so that they're addicted and obese? Like, is that good? Anyway, I don't know what you think of RFK, and I haven't looked into it so much that I can give a truly informed opinion, but I don't think it's a bad thing to ask the questions that are being asked. And apparently they've agreed to take some food dyes out, which good for them because, like, do we need more chemicals? And maybe you saw that thing where he was testifying to Congress, RFK was maybe in his confirmation hearings, and he had 2 bags, and one of them were Fruit Loops that are manufactured in the United States, and they're super colorful, and then there were Fruit Loops that are manufactured in Canada. And they still had colors, but they were natural vegetable and fruit dyes, apparently, so they're more muted colors. But he's like, "But we're feeding our American kids. We're supposed to be the most prosperous country in the world, and yet we're feeding garbage to our children. We're adding all this stuff that doesn't need to be there, and that other countries won't even permit." Anyway, maybe you've heard too of, just you can't avoid it because farming is on a commercial scale. Now, it's good to have a backyard garden if you can, but we are not usually able to produce all the food that we eat, and certainly not year round. So I'm not suggesting that we become paranoid. Although I do like the title of that book that I have not read called Only the Paranoid Survive. I really should pick that up and read it sometime because I love the title. Anyway, but there's a balance, and let's not go extreme because paranoia is not going to help us. And fear should not be the basis of our life choices or our direction or our manner of living. Fear is not faith, brothers and sisters. I guess what I'm saying is that let's understand that we can be better informed about some of our choices when it comes to taking care of our bodies. But ultimately, especially in a world where information is so layered and so suspect sometimes, consider the source and follow the money, right? Because a lot of this really has to do with money. But as we do those things, let us seek the Spirit and recognize that it may not be just spiritual survival. Maybe it's also going to be our adherence to taking care of the temples of our spirits. The commandment to care for the temples of our spirit, our bodies, our physical bodies are a gift given to house our spirit. And we do have a stewardship. And I hope that we don't get extreme, but that we also, wise up as needed and take the time to be thoughtful and do some research where possible and not panic, not get lost in paranoia. Let me make that very clear. And yet make good choices that work for us. And, our bodies are idiosyncratic. Medications affect us differently. Some of us can tolerate certain foods and some of us can't. So, there is a path that the Lord always leaves open for us to seek through study and faith the way that we can wisely take care of our bodies. And the spiritual blessings that come are guaranteed, even if we don't get all the physical blessings in this life. We will, in the life to come, we will have perfect bodies, which, it's a more generous gift than I certainly understood in my youth. And now, at this stage of my life, I look more and more forward to the resurrection. I have to share just one verse from section 90. And I've told this story before, so forgive the repeat, but I am going to repeat it. I was dealing with some kind of burden. And the truth is, I can't even remember what it was, but it was heavy enough that I was praying about it as I was walking on the Puerto Rockwell Trail that goes right behind our house. And this was early in our residency in Utah, so over 25 years ago probably. And I was praying about this burden. And isn't it telling that I can't remember what it is now? It was very heavy then. It was really heavy, and I remember feeling kind of overwhelmed by it. But now I can't even remember what it was because time passes and the world keeps turning and life goes on. But I learned something that day that I was very grateful for. As I was sort of praying, walking, kind of conversing with the Lord, and expressing my feelings of being not sure how this was going to work out. I remember that was the issue. Like, how are you going to pull this out of the fire, Lord? Like, I know you make promises, but how are you going to resolve this? Because it's pretty complex. Again, I wish I could remember what it is, but, it is a pretty good lesson that I don't. But whatever it was, it felt heavy. And I do remember that was one of the things I expressed. How are you going to pull this out of the fire, Lord? Like, I know you can, but I don't get how it will happen. And these words came into my mind. Now, I couldn't have told you while I was walking on the trail that day that it was section 90, verse 24, but now I do. And it has become an even more favorite scripture up there with all the other favorite scriptures of mine. And I knew the words. I didn't know the reference, but I knew the words. Search diligently, pray always, and be believing. And all things shall work together for thy good if you walk uprightly and remember the covenant wherewith ye have covenanted one with another. So I remembered those words, and they came into my mind while I was praying. And I remember my response which was, maybe not my most stellar moment, but this is the truth. My first response in the prayer conversation I was having after these words came to my mind was, all things, in kind of a doubtful tone. Like, all things? Like, even this tangled mess that I'm feeling burdened by? All things? Like, you're guaranteeing all things are gonna work together for my good. Like, do you really mean all things? That was my first expression, shame on me, and immediately the words came to my mind in answer through the Spirit. Either it's the truth or God's a liar, choose one. No kidding. This is exactly what came into my mind. Either it's the truth or God is a liar, choose one. Now, brothers and sisters, I made that choice decades before that moment, as did you. Now, and sometimes we need to remind ourselves that we've made that choice. And that was what was happening to me. And I was duly chastened. I heard that and I'm like, okay, darn it. Yeah, I got called on that one. Because I know he's not a liar. I don't know how he's going to bring resolution to every issue. I don't. But that's what I have to believe while I still can't see it, right? That's the whole point of faith, is believing what I can't see. And I do believe it because God says it again and again. And what are the criteria? Now, let's just review the formula here. And of course, there are lots of things the Lord wants to invite us to do so that he can open up the channels of heavenly blessings and pour out the blessings on his people in the right time and in his way. But it's right there. Search diligently, pray always. And I'm going to skip the next one. Then the promise, all things shall work together for your good if ye walk uprightly. So search diligently, pray always, walk uprightly, remember the covenant. And which one did I skip? Be believing. And why did I skip it? Because maybe that's the hardest part, brothers and sisters. Maybe that's the hardest part, to be believing. Faith is a stretch when we're hurting, when we're in pain, when we're caught in grief. I love that verse, and it has become very meaningful in our whole family. Since then, I shared that with my kids, of course, and I was like, wow, I really did get called out on my doubts and chastened by the Spirit, and I at least had to acknowledge God is not a liar. I know he's not a liar. So believe that all things shall work together for our good if we search, pray, walk uprightly. He doesn't say you have to be finished. He doesn't say we have to be perfect or complete yet. But search, pray, walk uprightly, and believe. And believe. Okay, I wanted to share this because this really touched me. This is a letter that was written in 1946 by an astrophysicist named Richard Feynman. He was a theoretical physicist and a Nobel Prize winner in physics who helped develop the atom bomb, and he was ranked in one ranking by the Physics World Journal as one of the 7 greatest physicists of all times. So brilliant man who lost his wife early, his first wife early. And I think it was not quite 2 years after her death that he wrote this letter that has kind of gone out there. I guess somehow it got shared. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's resonated with me and some of you who have experienced loss in the past or recently or will in the coming years. Darlene, I adore you, sweetheart. I know how much you like to hear that, but I don't only write it because you like it. I write it because it makes me warm all over inside to write it to you. It is such a terribly long time since I last wrote to you, almost 2 years. But I know you'll excuse me because you understand how I am, stubborn and realistic, and I thought there was no sense to writing. But now I know, my darling wife, that it is right to do what I have delayed in doing and that I have done so much in the past. I want to tell you I love you. I want to love you. I always will love you. I find it hard to understand in my mind what it means to love you after you are dead. But I still want to comfort and take care of you. And I want you to love me and care for me. I want to have problems to discuss with you. I want to do little projects with you. I never thought until just now that we could do that. What should we do? When you were sick, you worried because you could not give me something that you wanted to and thought I needed. You needn't have worried. Just as I told you then, there was no real need because I loved you in so many ways, so much. And now it is clearly even more true. You can give me nothing now, yet I love you so that you stand in my way of loving anyone else. Now, he did go on and marry again. I think then the second wife ended that marriage in divorce, but then he married a third time, and I think he remained with that woman until his death. So I know some people have a chance to love again, and there's nothing wrong with that. It can be a wonderful gift if that happens. But at this point in his grief, he felt so much love for his first wife that she stood in the way of his loving anyone else. And then he says, but I want you to stand there. You dead are so much better than anyone else alive. And again, he shifted on that a little bit as time passed. I'm skipping some of what he wrote and not reading the whole letter, but you only are left to me. You are real. My darling wife, I do adore you. I love my wife. My wife is dead. He signs it Rich and then adds a P.S. Please excuse my not mailing this, but I don't know your new address. A little tender, a little whimsical perhaps, but that really touched me, and it made me think of this. I don't even know how I came across that. Somebody was sharing it in something. Anyway, but it reminded me of this statement by Richard Scott, who, as you know, lost his wife, Janine, many years before he passed. And he gave a speech in 2011 called The Eternal Blessings of Marriage, in which he said, I am confident that when in our future, and he's speaking about his life with Janine, I see her again beyond the veil, we will recognize that we have become even more deeply in love. We will appreciate each other even more, having spent this time separated by the veil. And I believe that, and I am experiencing that. It's surprising how much love can continue to grow, and not just the part about absence makes the heart grow fonder. It's not just that, although that's part of it. There's a different view that you're able to have of the relationship when you're not immediately in it. And I've found myself retrospectively understanding some of the dynamics of our marriage that were such gifts and blessings, and for which my gratitude has increased. Many of those things involved elements that I was very aware of and expressed gratitude for. I actually found a tender letter that Chris had written to me. And I found it the other day when I was going through some papers, and I don't know how it just got in this pile of papers. I'm so glad it didn't get discarded. But now it's set aside in a safe place. But I was grateful to see that Chris mentioned that I expressed appreciation to him, and he was glad for that. And he had always been glad that I was consistent about that. And vice versa. Chris was also very appreciative. We tried to teach our children to be appreciative, to even, thank their parents for dinner, to thank their parents for things and thank each other. But anyway, you try, right? But I guess looking back, I can see how there are dynamics that I think I missed. I was too close to them, or, we were just in the business of life that was so very demanding, raising our family and then, all the graduate school stuff. And then, anyway, all that has led to that has kept us kind of running at full speed, that I am grateful for the time to look back and grow in my understanding of the great blessings that came to me through my marriage. And I know not everybody has a positive experience in marriage, but that doesn't mean that marriage itself is not a blessing. I mean, it can be an incredible trial and challenging, and some marriages need to end. All of that is also true. But marriage is intended to be a blessing, and there are always ways that we can grow and progress, whether we are married to a good partner or a not so great partner, or even an evil partner. We can still grow and we can still become, and yes, maybe a marriage needs to end under consultation with the Lord and direction, which He will give. And I have seen that happen for many clients over the years. But I am grateful that love can grow beyond the veil, and I feel it, and I'm grateful that I can feel it. It doesn't mean I miss him less. I think I miss him more because I love more. But I'm grateful for that love, and I'm grateful that it continues to grow. Let's see, do I have time to share this last thing? Yeah, I'm going to talk about this because it's nice, and I put it off from last week. So this is from a speech given by Elder Quentin Cook in 2016 called Valiant in the Testimony of Jesus. Heber C. Kimball was one of the original 12 apostles of this dispensation and the first counselor to President Brigham Young. He warned, "The time is coming when it will be difficult to tell the face of a saint from the face of an enemy to the people of God." That's an interesting statement, isn't it? I think we're there. I think we've been there. It's difficult to tell the face of a saint from the face of an enemy to the people of God. Then look out for the great sieve, for there will be a great sifting time, and many will fall. There is a test coming. In our day, the influence of Christianity in many countries, and this is, again, back in 2016, and so things are worse now. I've mentioned that book I read just last year called Pagan America. Really catalogs a lot of the loss of Christian belief in the United States, and certainly it's worldwide. So the influence of Christianity, he's saying, in many countries is significantly reduced. Without religious beliefs, there is no feeling of accountability to God. Shocker, that goes together. Absolute correlation. If we don't believe that there is a Judeo-Christian code and that God has given commandments and we're accountable someday, then, yeah, we don't feel accountable for our behavior. Accordingly, it is hard to establish universal values about how to live. Well, again, we're seeing all kinds of values being promoted as acceptable or equally valuable or whatever without any appropriate or righteous judgment. Philosophies which are deeply held often conflict with each other. Again, we've got converts on every side, atheist converts, we've got agnostic converts, we've got pagan converts, we've got, anyway, Satanists out there. People really deeply hold their beliefs and they can be completely contradictory. Unfortunately, this happens also with some members of the church who lose their bearings and become influenced by the cause of the moment, many of which are clearly not righteous. In line with Elder Kimball's prophecy, Elder Neil Maxwell said in 1982, "Much sifting will occur because of lapses in righteous behavior which go unrepented of." I think that is a really important thought. Much sifting will occur because of lapses in righteous behavior which go unrepented of. Lapses. I mean, that's not even necessarily, could include it, but not necessarily overt rebellion, but just maybe not taking sacred things seriously. And we've talked about that, the condemnation that Ezra Taft Benson emphasized from the DNC that said, we're taking the Book of Mormon too lightly. We're taking it for granted. And it involves all sacred things of the Lord. If we're lapsing in our attention to our covenants, if we're treating them casually, if we're complacent, if we become part of that crew that says all is well in Zion, yeah, Zion prospereth, we're all going to the celestial kingdom. Anyway, lapses in righteous behavior which go unrepented of, because we should repent if we're not lively members. Let's tie it back to the counsel to Frederick Williams to be a lively member, valiant in the testimony. And of course, that's the title of Elder Cook's remarks. So again, Elder Maxwell, much sifting will occur because of lapses in righteous behavior which go unrepented of. So there is a call to each of us. When we drop the ball for a while and then we pick it up again, well, we got to make sure that we're totally repenting and we recognize that we do need to stay valiant. Continuing, Elder Maxwell said, a few will give up instead of holding out to the end. A few will be deceived by defectors. And that's happening all over. We've got defectors on the internet like crazy. Likewise, others will be offended. It happens all the time. For sufficient unto each dispensation are the stumbling blocks thereof. And of course, we talk about sophistry as another huge stumbling blocks of our generation, where we stopped being critical thinkers, who stopped recognizing and analyzing the dogma that's out there, or the propaganda, or the ideas that are, so prevalent all over in our information age. And we don't look past the end of the sentence sometimes to say, like, but does this have a place that is consistent with the gospel of Jesus Christ? Or is this a false idea, very compelling perhaps, very nicely packaged, very seductive, and yet false? That's sophistry, brothers and sisters. Those are ways that the Lord is using a great sieve, and it's happening. Whether or not we see the completion of that, I don't know. I hope it's in not too many years, and I hope we will see it, and I hope that Zion will be established because we get our act together, and we, as a collective, that enough of us choose to become Zion ready. We choose this path of sanctification. We choose celestial glory. We can do this, brothers and sisters. We have everything we need. We need to just take our desires and make them manifest in our lives and trust that the Lord is patient with our efforts, because He is. But He wants us to choose that direction and persist diligently on the path, and He can magnify all our efforts. Let's choose glory. Let's build Zion. As ever, my deepest gratitude to my beloved partner, Chris Anderson, and Doug Larson of Point Digital. Take care.